So today in this lesson we're going to be talking about how we can better control an RGB LED with an Arduino, and we're going to be using something called pulse width modulation, so we need to understand what that is. So up till now and in the previous lesson we have used digital control of an LED. That means that we're using the Arduino digital pins, and we can either supply a high or a low voltage, so 5 volts high, 0 volts low. And that means that our LED can either be on or off. So we need to ask the question, well, what if I want a dim LED? I really can't do anything with just the digital input or outputs, high or low. And we found that if we mix the colors together, because we're using an RGB red, green, blue LED, we can mix the colors together to get some other colors, but we're still kind of limited. So red and green was yellow, green and blue was cyan, red and blue was magenta, and red, green, and blue all together gives white light. Well, the question then becomes, what if I want to get something other than red or yellow, cyan, magenta, or white? If I want to mix those colors. I really don't have any option with digital control of an LED, so we've got to figure out something else. So what we're going to use is something called pulse width modulation. With this technology, we can simulate an analog output from a digital pin. So we can simulate the output from the pin being some other voltage between 0 and 5. And the way we do that is supply 5 volts for only some of the time. And we do that in a rapid frequency. Arduino's pulse width modulation frequency is about 500 hertz, and that means that there are 500 of these cycles per second. That means that the distance between, or the time between the beginning of one cycle and the next is 2 milliseconds. So what you can see here in this diagram is what we would do for pulse width modulation. And there's a terminology called duty cycle. That just means the percent of on. So if I have a 25% duty cycle, that means that my voltage is high for 25% of this cycle time. If I have 50% duty cycle, then it's on for 50% of the time, 75% on for 75% of the time, and then 100% duty cycle is on for all of the time, so basically all on. So let's see how we would use PWM on Arduino. So there are digital pins on your Arduino that have a little squiggly line or tilde next to the pin number, and those are the pins that are capable of providing PWM. The numbers on Arduino Uno are digital pin number 3, 5, 6, 9, 10, and 11. So we can program the programming command that we use to accomplish PWM is an analog write command, and we need to tell it what pin to analog write to and what value we want to give it. That value can be any integer between 0, which is off, and 255, which is on all the time. So 100% duty cycle would be 255, 0% duty cycle would be 0. For example, if I wanted to, if I wrote the command analog write 9, 64, that would mean I would have a PWM duty cycle of 25%, since 25% of 255 is 64, written to pin 9. So I would get some dim color of whatever LED is hooked up to that example. So I can use pulse width modulation to mix colors and actually create a whole spectrum of colors. With the RGB LED, we can make any color in the spectrum by setting the pulse width modulation value to the correct decimal code for that color. So for example, if I want to create a purple color that I like that has the code 153 for red, 51 for green, and 255 for blue, looks something like that, then I would turn on an RGB LED by programming these commands. So I'd set the red pin to 153, set the green pin to 51, and set the blue pin to 255, all using the analog write command. Now that we know what we can accomplish with pulse width modulation, let's go ahead and experiment with it. Okay, so now we are going to use pulse width modulation to change the colors of our LED. What I have up on the screen here is the Blink RGB program that we created in the last lesson, with the exception that now I have created a constant to tell me the number of colors. Number of colors is 3, red, green, and blue. And then instead of using 3, I use the constant n colors to define the size of my array. That's just in case I want to change that some other time. All I have to do is change it up here. So just to review, in the last lesson we used the digital write command to turn on and turn off one color at a time. Now we want to change this to an analog write command. So I'm going to change the function that we use to turn on colors to use the analog write. In order to do that, I have to add another variable that I'm passing to or argument that I'm passing to this function so that I'm telling it about, and I'm going to call that intensity. So this function will now expect something to tell it the color and something to tell it the intensity, or how bright to make that color. So we'll change this digital write command to analog write, and we still send it which color pin to turn on, but now we have to tell it intensity, how and what the intensity it needs to have for the pulse width modulation. This intensity will be a value between 0 and 255. Okay, so that is all that we have to do for this function. We have to do another change to the color off function. So I'm changing the color off function to use analog write, and now I don't want to use the low command. I'm going to analog write for an intensity of 0. So this still is saying which color pin and what intensity. So for off, we want it to be an intensity of 0. Now I would like to add another function just to turn everything off at once. So I'm going to call this all colors off. And I won't pass it any arguments. I'm going to use a for command, for int, and I'll iterate on color. So from color equal to 0 until, as long as color is less than 3. Actually, I should say n colors. And then we'll add one to color each time the loop executes. And in that loop, I'm just going to use the same color off function that I've already written. So it'll run through this loop 3 times for each color and turn everything off. So that'll give us the ability to turn everything off at once. Alright, so now I'll leave all these initializations the same as before, and going to change how I'm turning on and off my colors. So I'll delete all of this. what I want to be able to do, I want to experiment with turning red on just a little bit and have it ramp up and increase and become as bright as it can be and then dim slowly. So I can use a for loop to do that, and I'm just going to change the intensity a little bit each time the for loop runs. So for integer, I'll iterate on I from I equals 0 until as long as I less than 256, because I want it to stop at 255. And I plus plus, I want to add one each time I iterate through the loop. So I'm going to call color on, and we'll do red. So now I'm sending the function that I've written, color on, I'm sending it what color to turn on and the intensity to turn it on. So it'll use that analog write statement. And then just so that we can see this happen, I'll give it a 5 millisecond delay so it doesn't happen too immediately. So we can see that we have had this flashing red, green, blue from our previous lesson. So if I save and upload, now we can see it dims. Let's add a delay of a little bit of delay so we can actually see that happening. So it gets brighter. It's kind of hard to see directly with the camera directed at the LED, but you can see it reflected here on a piece of paper. You can see how it gets, it's slowly increasing its brightness. So now I'd like to be able to maybe dim that light a little bit. So I will do another for loop. I'll still iterate on I, but I'm going to start at I equal 255. Actually, I want to make sure the color is off. Before I do anything else. So I greater than 0. So I'm going to iterate on I, starting at I equal 255, and iterate as long as I is greater than 0. And instead of I plus plus, I'll say I minus minus to say that I'm going to subtract 1 each time the loop runs. So now I'll say, I'll still call my color on function and pass it the color that I want and the intensity that I want. Give it a little bit of a delay so we can see it happen. And whoops, I don't want to turn it off before I dim it. I'm going to turn it off after I've dimmed it. Make sure that it's off. Okay, so now I have code that should slowly increase red and then slowly decrease red. So let's save and upload that. You can see red coming on slowly and coming off slowly. It'll be a little easier to see it on the paper, reflected on the paper. So now I've got to fade in and fade out. Pause the video and you can do that for both green and blue. Okay, now I have added code So here's my code that I already had to slowly dim or increase and decrease red, and I've added code to do the same thing for green and to do the same thing for blue. So let's upload that and see how that looks. So I can increase red, increase green, and blue. So I'm dimming out, in and out, all three of the colors. So if you can see that against the paper, a little easier to see maybe. I could actually collapse this all into another for loop. And iterate on the colors. Actually, let's call it color. Alright, so now I can take this chunk of code, put it into my for loop, and instead of red here, I'll say color. And now I can delete all this other stuff, and it's simplified my code quite a bit. I'll come up here and just have it auto format so that I can see how everything lines up. So for every color, I'm going to slowly increase the color and then slowly decrease the color. Alright, let's upload that. Make sure that it does the same thing that we expect. Increasing red, green, and blue. So it does the same thing as before in much shorter code. So now that we've done that, we're able to increase and dim lights and control their intensity. Now we can start mixing colors. So let's write a function so that we can be able to do that. I'm going to go up here, back up in the beginning, and start writing another function. So I'm going to call this custom or color custom. So I can teach it any color that I want. And the variables that I'll pass it are red eye for the intensity of red, green eye for the intensity of green, and blue eye for the intensity of blue. So now I'm going to, for each of the colors, I want to be able to turn on their LED. So inside my function, I'm going to write three statements. I'm going to call color on for red and pass it red eye for the intensity. And do the same thing for green. Passing it the color and the intensity. Now I could have written a for loop to do this, but I would need to define my intensities a little bit differently. So I'll just type it out for now. Alright, so now I can go down here and create any color that I want. So let's say I want to make an orange color. I can call color custom, and I've already looked up the codes for the color that I want. I'll do 76 of red, 0 of green, and 153 of blue. So it looks like I'm going to have a purple color here. And I want this to be on for a second, and then I'm going to turn all the colors off. And delay. Okay, so now I should be able to see it blink this color that I have chosen. And just so that we can see only that, I'll comment out all of this other code. So we're only going to be running this blinking in my loop. And I'll take out this delay that I don't need anymore. All right, save that and upload. A little bit of debugging just from typing errors. So now I've got kind of this purple color that hopefully you can see a little bit better on the screen or on the paper. So pause the video and make sure that you can turn on any color that you would like to turn on and off, and play with the mixing of red, green, and blue using your custom color function. All right, now I'm going to program in a sequence so that it fades in and shows a whole rainbow of colors. So I'm going to pause the video while I type it in so you don't have to wait while I'm typing, and then come back and show you what it looks like, and then you can replicate that code. So at this point I've finished coding to have my sequence of colors changing. First I fade in red, then increase green, then fade out the red, then fade in the blue, fade out the green, in red, out blue, and finally out red. So it kind of has this rainbow effect that you can see here with, I put the little paper balloon over the LED so you can maybe see that a little better. You can also kind of see it reflecting on the paper, what color it is. So go ahead and play with this program that you should now have, so you can change the color to whatever color you would like it using pulse width modulation, and make sure that you're able to make your own fade in and out program.